Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live, my friends. I'm your host, Erin Urban, and today we're going to dive into a common belief that might be a myth. You ready? My outstanding guest today, Chris Coladinato, proposes that yes, you can, in fact, create amazing connections virtually. Hmm. Surprised? Well, maybe you thought that connections are best made in person like I did. I thought that too. And perhaps you're thinking we're doomed to plod through the virtual world forever, disconnected and unfulfilled. But don't despair, my friends. Chris is here to save the day. So if you're interested in elevating your impact virtually, come on in, grab a seat, say hi, say where you're from. I'd love to hear from you and welcome you, most importantly, to Career Coffee Chat today. Now, you've never seen my smiling face before. I'm known as Coach E Urban, and you find more about me at my website, coacheurban.com. Remember that this show and all of the Career Coffee Chat shows can be found not only on YouTube, but also on all the major podcast channels as well. Just search for Coach E Urban on LinkedIn or on YouTube to get the live videos. And of course, follow Career Coffee Chat, hashtag Career Coffee Chat on LinkedIn if you want to see those on LinkedIn. And then, of course, the podcast is available on all the major channels as well. So let's dive into how to build your authentic virtual connections with Chris Coladinato today. So a little bit about our awesome guest. She is a virtual leadership coach and founder of Connection Catalyst, where she helps leaders and teams connect and communicate more effectively. Her mission is to look beyond the tech and build human connections in the virtual and hybrid teams. Now, her superpower is building meaningful connections in a virtual world. So I don't know about you, but I'm anxious to hear more of what Chris has to say and welcome you to the show. Yay! Love to
Hi.
see you.
It's
Yeah,
great
for
to be
any of you
seen.
tuning in, at any point during the show or watching the replay later, let us know your thoughts, what you're thinking. Say hi, say where you're from. We'd love to hear from you. And most importantly, what's tripping you up in the virtual world? We want to hear from you because I don't know if you guessed or noticed. If you've been living under a rock, maybe you might have not enough noticed, but remote's where it's at. Virtual is
Yep.
the hashtag future of work. So here we go. So, Chris, I
Oh,
know you're an expert, and I am deeply interested to hear about this transition from doing this inside the corporate space for your former employer and now doing this on your own as correct connection catalyst. I'm very excited to hear about that.
yeah. It's been an interesting transition these past couple of months, and I am loving every minute of it.
Yay.
Really, truly. It gives me an opportunity to work with a wider audience, which
Mm-hmm.
is what I really like. And an audience, while inside a company, you have a kind of a microcosm of
Mm-hmm.
everything else happening. It's
Right.
just expand it, and I get to work with people in different industries. And while it's all kind of comes down to the same issues, it
Mm-hmm.
just looks different, which is really kind of cool and interesting. And you get to unpack all those issues and help people. I get to help more people, which is what I truly
That's
love to do.
fun. Yay! Yay! We were just chatting before the show how about personality types and how that
Mm,
drives how sometimes
mhm.
we show up or not in the virtual space, and what comes naturally and authentic to us is very different depending on your natural work style. And everybody has a different work style. So if you're tuning in or you're listening to the podcast and you're like, work style, what? What is that thing? Well, we all have different work styles. And top tip, if you're working with somebody and you think they might be crazy or just don't get you at all, they're probably a polar opposite work style.
Mhm.
Yay. So with that being said, we will chat about a little bit about that. Like, how does who you are
Mhm.
play into how you show up? Because quite frankly, I've always said who you are is how you lead. Well, who you are is how you show up. Right, Chris?
Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting because I started my career working in retail, and then I moved into a corporate job, and I was in an office, and then they closed my office. And for 2 years, this is back in 2008, for 2 years I absolutely hated working remotely. Hated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hated it. Was looking for jobs elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, one, it was at a time where there wasn't a lot of tools out there.
Right.
We didn't have there wasn't Zoom, there wasn't StreamYard. So we were really restricted. But I think for me, I had to take a look and see what it was that I enjoyed and I got from being in the office, and then figure out how I could transition that to the virtual world. And I think that is one of the issues I know that a lot of people
Hmm.
have, where they either assume it can't be done,
Right.
or they say, well, they try to do the same thing. So they try to
Hmm.
do a one-to-one. Oh, so we want to have potlucks, but we're going to do them virtually. Or we want to have water cooler conversations. So let's just have water cooler conversations virtually, instead of taking a step back and thinking, well, what is it I got out of that? What am
Right.
I trying to
Hmm.
replicate? And then figuring out how to do that. And
Yeah.
it's different for everybody. You
It is
really have to
different.
figure that out.
It is different. And it's what's interesting. I'm just reaching over here for my mobile device because this is one of the ways we can connect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I am a person who's like, phone, smartphones, boo, smartphones. You know, let's just say, well, okay, let's just take this out of the workplace. All
Okay.
right. And let's just say, okay, when we're all in lockdown and we couldn't be near grandma, grandpa, mom, and dad. And we knew that, well, we need to talk to them. They need to have social
Mm-hmm.
contact. This is so important, by the way. I've done a lot of studies on isolation. And let me just say, it's horrifically alarming.
Yeah.
Isolation is terrible on the human brain and body. So it's so important to be able to connect somehow, whether through a smart device or whether it's through a computer or what have you, to those around you when you are in a position to where maybe whatever reason you cannot necessarily see them in person. Take, for example, my husband's family in the UK. Well, they're across the pond
Right.
and we weren't traveling. So he hasn't seen them in over 2 years.
Wow.
But we talk to them every Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to the point about isolation.
Mhm.
So my mom is in assisted living, and during
Mhm.
lockdown, they were in one room. She was in her room,
It's so hard.
and it is. And I would go up, and luckily I lived close by, so I would be on my phone with her because we couldn't go in and
Hmm.
see her, but I'd be standing outside of her window, so at least she could see me.
Yeah.
And it's just, you get to a point where, "Oh, I don't need people, or I don't want to be around people." But the truth
Mm,
of the matter is we do need people,
we do.
and we
Yes.
are wired to be social creatures.
Absolutely.
That doesn't
Absolutely.
mean we have to be social all the time. And it doesn't mean social doesn't always mean "Hey, how you doing?" or, "What did you do
Faux
last
social.
weekend?" Yeah. So, oh, I like that, faux social. I've
Yeah,
not
faux
heard that
social.
before.
No, please don't do faux social. I want to circle back a little bit to your transition because you are a people person.
I
I
am.
mean, if you do disc for work style assessments at all, I mean, Chris shared that she's a DI. I'm predominantly a DI as well, depending on the day. So you're like, okay, you had the drive to figure out how
Mhm.
can I make this work, and the desire to be around people and make that connection genuine. So that was kind of a perfect storm in a way for you
Mhm.
to get through this, figure it out, and then you had the drive to put it in
Yeah,
place. Now there's some folks that's not their style. They're
right.
a little bit more reserved. They're they need to be around people, but they're not like the life of the party.
Mhm.
They're not necessarily an
Mhm.
I style, although we'll go back to those people who lead with I, where they're like, oh my God, I'm going to die if I'm not around people. So it's true. I mean,
It
my
is true,
God, it's
and I'm
horrible.
laughing because some of those people are my dearest friends, and
Yeah,
if you
I
see
mean,
this replay, you know who you are.
absolutely. So, I mean, and these people love to work in teams. So
Yeah.
the people aspect is kind of subtle in a
Mhm.
way. They don't see themselves as peoply people because they're not, trying to be in the limelight, right? But that's not necessarily. But they get their energy from being around other people. Take for example, my husband is one of those people. He's S dominant,
Mhm.
which is steadiness on the spectrum. But S's are people who love to be around other people in a team environment, but they're very reserved. They're not going to step up and take the lead. So for these individuals, what would you say, Chris, is a great way? Because you really took the elements of what gave you energy and say, okay, how can I connect to the virtual space? What would you say to these individuals who may not have that same drive to make it easy for them to make those connections?
Yeah, I think it comes down to really thinking about one, what is it that you need? So
Mm-hmm.
if you know that you are in an office environment or you were in an office environment and you just felt better being around that hum of people. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
even have to be a big hum, but just hearing other people. What does that look like if you're working from home? So it could
Mm-hmm.
look like a couple of different things. It could look like maybe you leave your Teams or your Slack up, or you jump in every once in a while. And even a social hum or a virtual hum can still be a hum, and you can see and feel that energy. The same is true if you have any online discussion boards, whether it's Yammer or Workplace. It doesn't mean you have to go in and actively participate all the time, but visiting those. So for me, what I would do is first thing in the morning, and I still do this as an entrepreneur, I log into a network, whether that is a Slack group I'm a part of, whether it's LinkedIn. Previously, it was Workplace by Facebook or WebEx Teams. That was my morning routine. I logged in to see the hum and the activity, almost like I was walking
That's so
in
important.
doors,
Yeah.
and you see people and you wave. Doesn't mean I'm there liking all these posts and engaging. It's just getting that energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like, oh, well, that won't really do anything. But if you do that consistently, even for 5 minutes in a morning, every morning, it really does make a difference. Set
Yeah,
you up for the
that's
day.
so important. And I didn't even think about that because I'm not a hum person.
Mhm. I need that. I need the
Yeah.
energy and the noise, so my radio is always cranked.
Yeah. See
Um,
that
I
yeah,
feel
that's it depends too. If you grew up in a very busy household,
mm,
that helps you focus. To me, that's extremely distracting.
yep,
So I didn't even consider that, but you're right. There are quite a few people who get energy from just being a part of, even though maybe they're not having to engage every single
exactly.
point, but they're just involved. It's different between being involved and being around something
Yep.
versus being like, okay, I'm touching base with every single person. Now, Gerald mentioned has a question here. I want to be able to highlight that. He said, in the office, I can get 5 questions
Mm.
answered in 5 minutes. Yeah, I know, Gerald. I know where you're coming from because I can see when people seem to be available or by running into them. There's so many, don't we miss the whole, problem solve it by the water cooler in the break room, or I was going to the bathroom and I saw this person, and now, that meeting we're going to have last Thursday, well, we don't have to have that, right? Yeah, I get it. So he said, any suggestions on how to get the same efficiency remotely? I get this one a lot too. I'm sure you do.
Mhm. Yeah, I do, and it really depends on you, your team, and your organization setting up those systems to allow for those quick chats.
Mhm.
So, is there an opportunity to have a group? And this is what we would do. We got really good at working asynchronously, and we would pose questions in a group. So, if I thought about that question, I would post it in the group, and either the group or that person that I needed to talk to was in that group. When they saw it and when they got to it, they would be able to quickly respond to it. We got
Mhm.
really good at having those for very specific things. So if you might have one for a support for your contact center employees, where they could just pose quick questions instead of turning around and asking the person, hey, have you ever had this? If you have an area or a chat where everybody's a part of just for support questions, for example.
Right. That's so important. Yeah.
Yeah, so you need to have those
Mhm.
sections or those opportunities to have those quick connects. The other piece of this, Gerald, is it's a shift of mindset. So you're not going to just pop in. and be able to walk past someone and get those questions. That's not how the virtual world works until we get to the metaverse where we're all these virtual reality people. And I don't know when that will be, but
Very soon. We'll talk about that a little
very
bit
soon.
later. Very soon. Faster than
So
you think.
it's shifting and seeing and being okay with and understanding that asynchronous work where you
Mhm.
compose something and you might not get an answer immediately, then that's okay. And people will chime in as needed. The
Right.
other piece of this is figuring out what are those quick connect options for you in the workplace. So if you do need something or you
Mhm.
work on a team where, there's an opportunity we need to connect with each other immediately, then have a conversation about what that looks like. Maybe it is you have a text chain set up or you have a Slack channel set up where
Mhm.
this is, everybody needs to have their notifications turned on for that.
Mhm.
So I think it's a couple of things. One, have it set up. Where are those quick connect channels that you can set up in your organization, whether it's Yammer or a community or a Slack group? And then what mindset do you need to have and say, okay, I'm not just going to pass people in the hallway and be able to get all my questions answered at once. And that's okay. I'm going to shift and work more asynchronously. And then, it's just really thinking through how can I make that happen and how can I do it in a way when we do need to reach each other in an emergency? What does that look?
Right. Right. And it doesn't always have to be video cameras on either.
No,
You
no.
know.
Most of mine was, just quick text based.
Mhm.
And, hey, we need to, and if we needed to escalate that conversation, now let's take it to a video call
Right. And I
or
think
phone call.
one of the things I'm seeing a lot of, and I'm certainly hearing from those people I coach, is we have so many meetings because
Yeah.
people know, to Gerald's point, you can get so much done just by being near or around other people that have these answers. So you do have a valid point, Gerald. And
Mhm.
Chris, that's golden. But having those, what I call chat groups,
Yeah.
you know, and that's what it looked like on Slack, because I know I did this
Right.
particularly through Slack, and a lot of the channels are very, very similar in that
Mhm.
you can construct something. So let's just say as a project team, well, they have their own little channel, and I've got questions of, hey, did anybody think about that, or where are we on such and such? And you just pop it in there. It's not something that has to be answered right away, because if it is something, Gerald, or anybody else listening, that has to be answered right now, we have phones for that.
Exactly. And that's the piece of it is, figure out what are the channels that you can set up and
Mhm.
then what does it look like if it's urgent? And if
Yeah.
again that's a project team or that, yes, we've got phones. We forget how to use them sometimes.
I know, and we hop right on Zoom. And by the way, that's not everybody's comfort zone. Sometimes you can actually get a lot more out of a phone conversation than you can on a Zoom. And I'll share with you one of the reasons why. Because prior to 2020, all of my remote coaching, I did a lot of remote coaching, by the way. Almost all of my coaching was remote, was on the phone. Almost
Mhm.
no one wanted to do face. No, just didn't. And there was so many more nuances I got out of those conversations just by hearing the tone of voice or the hesitation or the pause.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, I hear some hesitation here. What's going on behind that? Oh, well, yeah. And then and you're listening at a different level. You
Yeah.
really are. And so, I not that I'm against having FaceTime. There's certainly great times for that. But also, let's not just discard the fact we have this lovely device where we can really hone those senses.
Yeah, and it still does phone calls. And
It
you
does.
can get, if you are going back and forth on a Slack channel or an email, it's time to pick up the
Mhm.
phone.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't have to be a video because to your
Mhm.
point, Aaron, when you're just listening and your other senses are shut down, where I don't have to think about where the camera is, who I'm talking to,
Mhm.
I can just listen. I might hear some nuances that I wouldn't get otherwise.
Right.
But if you do need that FaceTime, then open up a video chat.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, I feel like every organization and every person should have their own priority list. Like, okay, well, if it's this, it's an instant message or a Slack or a note or what have you. If it's this, it's a phone call. If it's this level, okay, we need to have FaceTime, particularly if it's some negotiation might be involved. That's
Mhm.
important. And then, go from there. But having that framework for people to lean into is so important. And one of the reasons why you should hire Chris to help you do
Well, and I
it.
think to your point, it's the framework.
Mhm.
So whether your organization has this set up or you and your team have a conversation. The other piece of this is before we kind of leave that question is I also want to make sure that we don't overuse the Slack
Mhm.
channels in the workplaces.
Mhm.
So I would keep my notifications off unless it was at me, or it was a direct message to me, because
Okay. Good.
after a while, it can, you know how our
Ding,
phones,
ding,
you
ding,
just
ding, ding.
exactly, it just keeps
Yeah,
pinging,
it's too
pinging,
much.
pinging.
It is too much.
It is
And
too
set
much.
aside those times. If
Yes,
anybody's ever heard me before, I talk about power pauses and brain breaks.
exactly.
That every hour and a half or so, you take that 5-10 minutes, 5 minutes, check your messages, and then the other 10 minutes you unplug. So Veronique has a really interesting note here. She said the virtual hum really resonates with
Mhm.
her. She's that concept of virtual hum resonates with me because I just need to watch people and get energy without actively engaging. There you
Mhm.
go. So I kind of do the same thing with LinkedIn, just check in, but don't do anything actively. It's just a new way of obtaining that humming energy. Right. And then some
Mhm.
people will actually go to like a coffee shop, or they just need to be around people. They don't necessarily need to be like that person has to be involved in my project, but they just need that energy of being around people to
I go
work
to
more
my
effectively.
library 2 times a week. That is
Mhm.
the one thing I found out. I don't need to interact with a person. I just need that hum. So I do the hum virtually through the Slack groups, the LinkedIn, the workplace, and then I feed it a different way by going to I used to go to the coffee shop, but I have a really great library, and it is got everything I need, and I can sit as long as I want.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really
And
awesome.
that's how I just hear the people. And if it gets to be too noisy when the kids are there and I accidentally came in during story hour, which I've done, oops, I just put on my noise canceling headphones and I
Yeah.
hear a little less of a hum. But I
Mhm.
still know there's people around me. So
You
that's
get energy from that. I mean,
you do.
let's face it, we're not advocating, okay, let's replace all in person
No.
with virtual. No, no. And we can be very productive and get a lot accomplished if we do leverage our tools smartly. So, whenever I was involved with a Slack channel, I would get notifications, like you mentioned, if they were at me,
Yeah.
I would get the notification. Then I would set up okay, twice a day, I check
Mhm.
these couple channels just to make sure have I missed anything? Is there something going on? Just catch up on what's going on because you'll see the conversation stream,
Mhm.
and that's a little bit of that hum too. Oh,
Mhm.
okay, so now I'm up to date. It's just like being around people chatting about it, right? Only you're reading it instead of hearing it. So,
When you said something really important is you scheduled it. So you were
mhm,
intentional about it.
yes,
And I think we were talking about this before we jumped on live, which is, we take a lot of things for granted, and we took the office for granted. It fostered those interactions. It fostered that hum for us. It fostered that ability to get those 5 questions answered in 5 minutes.
hmm
But you can still do that in the virtual world just by being intentional and being thoughtful on how you design that for yourself. I
hmm
go back to, when we would interrupt people in the office because we saw them at our desk. Did they always like that? Probably not. Some did, and some probably were heads down, grumbling under their breath. Oh, they asking me a question. Hi, what can I answer for you today? So I think it's just, being intentional, scheduling those times. And I think we forget about that, where the office did that for us
hmm
because it had hallways and break rooms and things like that. We have to design that for ourselves. So if you think you need that hum, what does that look like? If you need a way to get questions answered quickly, what does that look like? And then
hmm
how do you do it in a way where you aren't overwhelmed? And that's your point, Erin, which is you schedule the time. And if you need to physically schedule it until it becomes a habit, then physically schedule it in your calendar.
Yeah, tasks are great.
Mhm.
They're great little reminders because I popped one on my calendar before we got on the show today. I was like, oh, I need to remember to
Mhm.
do that. And two, okay, so let's just say You live in tiny town Fayetteville, Texas, like I do. Population 270 on the weekends. So what do you do? People are like, oh my God, you must be so bored. No, actually, there's a lot going on. We're very, very, very fortunate to live here. So, okay, I take a walk.
Mm-hmm.
I go to my ladies' boot camp
Mm-hmm.
and get my butt kicked.
Well, and you bring up a really great point is you're not relying on work
Mm-hmm.
to feed all of your connection.
Exactly.
And that's the other piece of this is where else are you feeding that connection? Whether it is a book club or you are going out, and even if it's just sometimes I'll go to Joann Fabrics, which I'm a little bit of a fabric hoarder, but sometimes it's just to be around like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't go to buy anything. I look at the pretty fabrics, but I get this energy around being by people who have that much love for sewing and fabrics as I do. And I hear them talking about, ooh, I could make this. And I'm like, oh, I like that. So I get my energy. You get your energy. We don't always get it just from the workplace. And I think that's important. And I think that's a big piece that was missing when we were all isolated.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just work. It was
we couldn't feel like we could go. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we truly were isolated. And I don't know if anybody's interested to hear some of the stats about the impacts of isolation on the human brain and body. Send me a note, send me an instant message, or send me an email, or just reply to this video, or send me a note from one of the many podcast channels. I'm happy to give you that information. We won't discuss that here today. We'll be here for quite a while if we do. We really do want to dive more into creating those authentic connections virtually. So if you're tuning in an hour later, know that we care about your questions. So don't be shy. You know, say hi, give us a note. You know, send us your what is your big thing that you're like, oh, that's just not working for me, or I feel disconnected, or I struggle here. We want to know because we can help you. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's one more personality type. Let's see those people, and you know who you are. You're like, oh, you mean I get to stay at home and not talk to anybody and read a book and then get online occasionally? Oh, that's so cool. And when I show up to a meeting, I am not turning on my camera. Yeah, you know who you are. We love you.
I have some of those friends as well. I love them.
Yeah. So let's talk about how easy it is to make connections when you do that. Mm-hmm. And the importance of connections and what you can do to not rob.
Yeah, it goes back to that intentionality. And again, you know, I'm not saying that the workplace forced us to do it, but it kind of did. You had to be sitting around people. And we are social creatures. Whether you are the person who wants to be sitting down on your couch, reading a book and talking to no one, that's really great. However, you need people and people need you. So think about what are the ways that you can connect and interact with people in a way that is meaningful to you. Whether that is when somebody taps you on the shoulder virtually, it's not a, I can't wait until this person is done talking to me. It's a, I wonder how I can get curious about this person. Oh, it's an opportunity for me to connect with somebody. So it goes back to that faux social that we were talking. It's not just quickly getting the work done, but you might lean in and ask, how are you doing today? And really,
because if you're just like, you know, spewing platitudes out there, it's what I call faux social. And people can tell.
They can. They really can. So it's leaning in and getting curious and knowing you don't have to do it all the time. But if you don't do that, it ends up really truly hurting you in a way. And I'm talking about you as a person because you do need to connect with others and learn who they are and what they do and how that interacts with your work. It might lead you to have different ideas. You can share your perspectives. But if you're not talking to people and you're just coming in and out and flying into a meeting, having a small contribution and flying back out, you're missing an opportunity and missing an opportunity to make a bigger contribution and to really have people enter into your life who probably have something to add and something to contribute.
And know more about who you are because as most of you know, I study all of this lovely, nuances, social psychology, behavioral science, all that great stuff. And one of the things I have looked into at depth is, because most of my clients are reserved, not all, but most, what and why, most importantly, is it that the reserved person, particularly the reserved high achiever, so you're super accomplished, you're super smart, you're super hardworking, you are amazing, and nobody has any idea who you are because you don't talk to people. Really, I
Mhm.
mean, you're just not a gadfly, and that's fine. You don't have to
It
be
is.
chatty.
Yep.
And why do we see these people who really struggle to connect in the workplace and build relationships? And most importantly, why do we see these individuals who sometimes get picked on
Mm.
in the workplace? Well, it's because you're not giving them any data.
Right.
When we don't give people data as an indication of who we are and what our emotional temperature is or anything, then that leaves room for assumption. And we
Mhm.
know how awesome that is because it doesn't ever have anything to do with you and who you are. It has everything to do with the person making the assumption and how they feel that day.
Exactly.
And
Yeah,
that
and
goes
they'll
bad.
start to tell stories. And it is a matter of, when you're in person and you see the other person, usually there's some facial expressions that add to this. Well, we've taken that away when
Mm-hmm.
you're virtual. So people will start to make up a story. Oh, they're too busy. They don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably not true.
Right.
And what Aaron's saying is it doesn't mean you have to be out there all the time, commenting on everything,
Mm-hmm.
chiming in everywhere. What it means is you just need to take advantage, be intentional, and share and ask and contribute a little bit more. You don't have to go everywhere all the time and do everything.
No.
But when somebody says, "How are you?" and they sound like they mean it, tell them how you are.
Right.
Really.
Or better yet, give people that information when you chime into a meeting. Say, hi, everyone. I'm really happy
Mhm.
today. Who's having a good day?
Mhm.
That took little to nothing to do. And it just gives people an idea where you're coming from. I know we talked before, Chris, about moments that matter.
Yes.
And for those people who, again, you don't have to be everywhere. I mean, that's just not
Mm-mm.
reasonable.
Mm-mm.
But take advantage of the moments that matter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
whether
got
it's
a great question
a tap on the
here.
shoulder while you're getting that question up, whether it's a tap on the shoulder or whether it's the beginning of a meeting, the end of a meeting, your
Yeah.
one-on-one,
Mhm.
take a few moments. And before you have that one-on-one or, how are you going to interact? What is it that you want to get out of this
Right.
connection? Be intentional about it.
Yeah. So Angela is sharing from LinkedIn, if the workplace has gone completely remote, you mean when? When the workplace goes completely remote and we've lost the face-to-face connection, will it be best to look elsewhere? Um, Elsewhere to, I guess, whom are hiring
Mm.
on-site or hybrid. So if you're the person who's like, not going totally remote,
Mhm.
do I need to look for another job? Well, Angela, really, only you can answer that question. If you heard us chat about the different avenues and options that are available to you, you know who you are. If you are a strong people person and being remote is just like, oh my God, I'm going to die, then perhaps that's not your jam, right? And two, there's other ways you can get that energy. So knowing where you are in your life, what your work style is, and what your support group looks like, and where you are, you can make the smart decision for you. What do you think, Chris?
So, a couple of thoughts. First of all, I went remote in 2008 and hated it for the first 2 years, but loved my job and I stuck with it. So, that's just to say it isn't for everybody, but even a people person like me figured out how to shift to an online digital, and now I would have it no other way. Second, if you're newly remote and it happened during the pandemic, I would continue to stick it out because the pandemic was not what normal remote is like.
Mm.
We didn't have the opportunity to feed our connection in any other way. We didn't have the opportunity to go out and volunteer. I still can't do as much volunteerism as I want. We couldn't go out and see people and feed our connection that way. So that's another thing to just keep in mind
Mhm.
is the forced remote that we had. Everybody went remote 100% of the time. So that was hugely isolating, and that's not a good time to barometer.
No, and it can be traumatic. In fact, I
Yeah.
am seeing a lot of PTSD from that,
Yeah.
from people who did it that changed. One of my clients said, I'm a different person. I was like,
Mhm.
well, we can talk about how you want to be with those aspects of what you really liked about you and what you did, and then how you might bring that back into your life now, if you want to, because it was just such a massive shift,
It was,
and we
yeah.
felt like we really didn't have a choice. And
And
that's
that's
the thing.
the piece of it. So it goes
Mhm.
back to that, you have to decide what works for you, but you really have to think about what is it about the workplace that you were getting that you feel you're not getting here. And if you're just saying face-to-face connection, but what was it about that that you're missing?
Right.
And is there a way for you to figure out what that looks like for you in a virtual world if you're in a job that you really like? And I think it's worth it. But if you're like, "Yeah, no, I need the people," then maybe you can do some things externally that will feed that, which is what I do. Or maybe you do need to look for a different role. But as Aaron pointed out, only you can answer that particular one.
Yeah. So hopefully, Angela, that helped you. And if you want to ask more questions, feel free to do so now, or reach out to either one of us directly. We're happy
Yep.
to help you through this. I will say that in the last couple of weeks, I've had several in-person conferences, and I've never had more fun in my life.
Mhm.
After over 2 years of like no in person anything, no speaking events in person. It's not that I mind virtual speaking; I do it all the time and love that too. But oh my god, it was just I came back and I was just like
You
dancing.
do, you
And
get
I
an
was like
energy.
so energized. I was like, this is so
Yes.
much fun just being around other people. So I get it.
Yeah, and we couldn't do that during the pandemic. Even I everybody was like, "Oh, you were so prepared for this," because I started working remotely in 2008. Even I was struggling because I go to the library 2 times a week.
Right.
I couldn't go into my library. I kinda was, like, there at the window going, let me
I
in,"
know, I
and all
know,
I
I
could
know,
do
and I
was
didn't see friends for
you didn't
God
see
knows.
friends,
I still
no.
haven't seen a lot of them. I mean,
No
it
book club, no.
no,
So, again, it's you kinda have to set aside what's happened these past couple of years and which is still kinda happening now, and really just think through, what does connection look like for you? How do you still feed that?
mhm,
And what is it that you were getting from the workplace that you feel like you're not getting now? And
right,
a lot of times you can get that, but you
mhm.
do have to be intentional about it, and you do have to think about
That's the
what does that
golden
look
word
like?
is intentionality, and
Intentional.
and
Yeah.
for some people, it's frustrating because they're like, "Well, it just happened," when we were in person, and I get it, because now
Yep.
we have to, like, schedule those moments, but actually not, if when
Mhm.
you do take advantage of some of the technology tools and do have repository of, moments, if you will,
Mhm.
messages, information, moments that matter, then you can kind of be a little bit more spontaneous, even in the technical world. So not everything has to be scheduled. Now, Ronique had another thought here. She says, I read a book, Being Digital. I think that's the title, she says. And the first section was about how to work remotely. And it said the same kind of thing Chris is saying about the importance of talking to people and connecting. And also spoke about the importance of being top of mind.
Mm.
Yes, absolutely. Because for those of you who do identify with being more reserved, when you don't take advantage of those opportunities or those moments that matter, it, people are busy. They are
Mhm.
busy. They're not too busy for you to talk to them, by the way, though. So don't make up that story in your
Right.
head. But they have a lot of things going on mentally. So when you do contribute at appropriate times or just, have that empathy moment like, hey, you mentioned you're going on vacation, or how's your
Yes.
dog doing? I know
Yeah.
that, it wasn't feeling well. Just those moments that matter, that opportunity to be a person.
Yeah, and lean in and get
Mhm.
curious in a way that works for you. So it doesn't mean that you have to talk about a subject that you have no interest in talking about. What it means though is being a curious human and listening for those things that just, oh, that sparked something. Why
Mhm.
can't I lean into that? So you mentioned that Aaron had mentioned something about biking, and granted, biking in Texas in the heat right now, not great, but it could be a great conversation for us to have later. What are some of your favorite trails? Because I like to bike too.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't choose to talk to her about biking if I had no interest in it. Although I might want to say, why is it that you like biking so much? What about it that is it that you enjoy?
Mhm.
So going back to the faux social, it's you don't want to have chit chat just for chit chat, but get curious. We're human. We're interesting. We're just this all these atoms put together, and somehow we turn out to be this thing that
It's
talks and
creative,
walks and
innovative
yes.
creature. Yeah.
I think it's just fascinating.
It's
Humans fascinate.
fascinating.
They
Yeah, I
really
mean, and to
do.
be honest with you, and I talk about it in my book, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income. My biggest mistake as a young professional was that I was shackled to this belief that I'd be super professional and personal life didn't matter at work. So, yeah, it made me a real bitch to work for. Anyway, yes, I said that on public channels. I'll be censored next week. Watch the space. But I'm just being honest. And I would never have said that, by the way, 10 plus years ago, because
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh my God, that's not professional. I can't possibly be a real person. So nobody could relate to me. And I was always faux social, and people knew it. I was so busy being professional and getting things done. I didn't take time for people. And the biggest shift for me when my aha moment happened, whether I liked it or not, um, was just being curious about people, like genuinely curious, like seeing them as people and just being, wow. So what's going on there? How are you
Mhm.
doing? And people are like, who are you? What did you do with Aaron?
Well, and it's, it doesn't mean and the other piece of this is, you get curious with the people that mean something to you.
Mhm,
So you don't have to this doesn't mean that you have to shout out everything to the entire, world or your entire company. It
mhm,
means leaning in and getting to know the people on your team or the people that you do work with and project work with, or somebody that said something in your Yammer board that you're like, that was interesting. Why
mhm.
not reach out to them?
Yeah.
And, "Hey, can we have a coffee chat?" Or, "I'd like to talk more about what you posted online." That's taking advantage of a moment. You
Mhm,
had a moment where it sparked, it was like, "Oh, that was interesting." Why not lean into that moment? Even if it means you have to jot it down on your calendar as a task to do later, reach out to Aaron about
mhm.
XYZ. Totally okay. I do
Yeah,
that all the time.
all the time.
All the time. So it's taking advantage of those moments, but just being curious. And doesn't mean you have to be curious with every single person. No.
Yeah.
Who are those group of people that mean something to you, whether it's at the workplace or externally or social,
Mhm.
friends, and just be curious.
Yeah. I'd like to circle back to something Vernie mentioned about the importance of being top of mind, because I get this
Mhm.
more than a few times. How do I communicate my value, my impact, my professional ability in the virtual workplace? Because it's a little bit more natural if well, for most people it's not natural in general, but it's a little bit apparently easier to do in person. Because what happens is sometimes, depending on the work culture, depending on the temperature that the leaders have set up or not, it can be, you know, a who daddy look at me.
Mm, mhm.
And I have gotten this multiple times, particularly from women who are like, hey, look, I can't even like have two words come out of my mouth. other people I'm working with are so busy beating their chests and saying how awesome they are, and taking credit for my work. How can I possibly stand out? So, okay, one, be sure to report out individually to your leader ahead of the meeting. Send them a message
Great
offices.
point.
Boom, 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 boom. These are what I'd like to. This is what I'd like to talk about. And also want to make you aware of X, Y, and Z. So if that person knows you are responsible for whatever it is, and if Sam, Sally, Sue decides to take responsibility for it, well, that person already knows it. Well, that's interesting because Chris just mentioned that she's leading that project and made sure that deliverable happened, but you're saying you are. What happened there? It's happening out there, ladies and
Mhm.
gentlemen. It is. It's like, oh, I'm better. Look at me, Daddy. Particularly with leaders who are very busy and don't make enough time for
Yeah.
their teams, because they feel like that screen time they just have to be big and wonderful. The other one is those channels.
Yes.
Take advantage of them if you can. If
Exactly.
I love the shout out channel where people start plugging in, hey, Chris helped me with this project. She's amazing.
Mhm.
And just sending out gratitude, right?
Be seen.
Yeah, just putting it out there, saying, "Hey, this is
Mhm.
awesome. She did it." You have a kudos channel, or some
Mhm.
people call it a shout out channel, or a thank you board,
Yep,
or
we had
whatever
a
you call it.
kudos. Yeah, and it's
Mhm.
to your point, you need to be seen. And before we would be seen in an office. Well, your office is now whatever channels your workplace is using.
Mhm.
So you need to be seen and be seen in a way that feels genuine to you. I love the shout out channels. I think they're great. I think it's also an opportunity to see, if you have something like Yammer or Teams where you can post articles, is there something that's of interest to you that you want to share with others? Do that, share that, invite comments. And it's taking that time. I can't say this enough. It's being intentional about it. So if that means scheduling time on your calendar to say share or visit the kudos board or visit the shout out channel, is there a channel that a lot of your peers or your teams are a part of? Maybe you want to check that channel out too. So it goes to, being seen. And then also, as Aaron said, having that direct conversation or having that direct connect with your leader or that leader.
Mhm.
Because if they're super busy and they're not going to be the one who is reaching out, you need to be the one that's taking that effort and that incentive. That's not the right word, but you need to be the
Initiative.
one. Yeah, you need to take the action.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it doesn't have to be everything for everybody everywhere.
No,
No.
no, no.
Whatever resonates with you is alignment with your natural talents, gifts, and strengths. That's where and how you need to show up. Because as I mentioned before we even went live to Chris, who you are is how you show up.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
No matter
be
how much you
okay
try
with
and
that.
hide it,
Yeah,
it's gonna show up.
and and please don't think that you need to be someone you're not.
Right.
A lot of us are so afraid of judgment, that we don't show up as our true, beautiful selves.
Mhm.
And if you have questions about that, we'd love to hear them. If you listen to those privately, feel free to do so. But before we wrap up the show, I'd love to hear from anyone who doesn't have any more questions about thriving and building those genuine, authentic connections in the virtual space. Because, my friends, that's where we're headed. We are not going
Yep.
back to the way it's always been. The cat's out of the bag, the word's out on the street. We're not going
Well,
back.
and
It's
what's interesting though is, even looking at if you go to a hybrid or let's say you go back into an office,
mm,
the world is your oyster. So take advantage of all these things we were talking about today and using them to build your external network.
absolutely.
All of this can apply whether you're thinking about how do I internally work with people
Mhm.
or how do I make connections outside of my workplace.
Mhm. And quite frankly, even if you do go back to the office full time and that's something you want to do,
Mhm.
well, if unless you're working for a very small
I
company,
You
chances
need to
are
interact
you'll
online.
you'll be online doing Zoom and
That's
Teams and messages and chats and Slacks
exactly.
anyway.
Yep.
So these are all tools you can leverage.
Mhm.
And moving forward into the future, just to give you some insights, In 2020, I believe it is, Google and Facebook invested billions of dollars into VR and AR, so virtual reality and augmented reality, because they knew that they could see it coming. The world is now virtual. And people struggle, just like Gerald mentioned. But I could get 5 things done in 5 minutes with people if I was seeing them one-on-one. You're right. So how do we recreate that? Well, let's stuff everybody in a virtual world. And for some people, that will become very comfortable. But that's a whole other show, my friends. So you have to stay tuned. Chris, it's been a deep, deep pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having me back. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been so much fun. I'm so excited for you. So reach out to Chris if you haven't already. Connection Catalyst is her company. She's awesome. Her company's awesome. She's amazing. She can figure it out. You can figure it out, my friends. So until next time, my deep wish for all of you is to keep elevating. Bye for now.
Bye.